We don't shoot first, we call the light. Commander Mara Ilias stood beneath the cold wash of the flag bridge lamps and watched the station's docking spines clamp, a human grain hauler like metal fingers around a wrist. The hauler's hull was still sun-warm from the inner orbits. Its thermal haze trembled over scarred paint. Somewhere inside that ship, a family counted crates and prayers with equal care. The toll-ward Concordat had seeded every corridor with debt officers wearing braided seals and polite knives. "Beacon spool is stable," said Juris Lieutenant May Serene. "Voice even. Posture wired tight. If their praetor honors the summons, we can open a register in the clear." "Amicus," Mara said, "confirm the quorum requirement." The shipmind answered with unhurried precision, its tone like brushed steel. 3 parties of interest, a representative public witness body, an accredited recorder with unedited persistence. If the praetor speaks doctrine under these conditions, it binds the Concordat within treaty wheel. Law spoken aloud binds the speaker. Outside the viewport, the station's rotating ring caught the blue of the star and broke it into bright slivers. The air recyclers on the bridge exhaled a faint citrus from activated filters. Mara tasted recycled acid on her tongue, a reminder of thin margins and thinner time. "They're hailing," said Comms Officer Okoye, one hand hovering over a mute sigil. "Praetor Sariv claims our unscheduled legal theatrics delay a mandated gratitude levy." Mara smoothed the cuff of her black uniform, a small ritual against older angers. "Put him through. Open channel, public mode. Witness net on." The holopane breathed and brought Serev into being, a tall figure wrapped in pale bands of myth thread legal cloth, every fold stitched with clauses. Behind him, a wall of glass showed the star like a pale coin. His throat crest fluttered politely. "Commander Ilias, your convoy uses our lanes. They owe." "Under wheel," Mara said. "Disputes over levy require a hearing. We have a quorum and a recorder. Speak your doctrine." "The Concordat's doctrine," Serev said, placing a trained caress on every syllable, "is the gratitude levy. Passage through stabilized transit volumes requires a contribution proportionate to cargo mass and social uplift. Non-payment places the passerby under the collar for the period necessary to clear the balance. All lawful, all merciful." "Define merciful," May said. Eyes on the recorder glyph that spun like a small sun. "For the record, release from penalty is certain once value is returned," Serev said. "Our mercy is mathematical. The quiet of numbers outlives threats." The beacon's outer petals unfolded like a steel flower above the bridge, thin ribs humming as they released coded light into nothingness. The station's nearer gantries vibrated, and even the grain hauler's old hull seemed to listen. Okoye's board pinged, the witness mesh lit with civilian pings. A machinist on the grain ship, hands black with oil. A nursery on an orbiting hospice, where children pressed ears to bulkhead to feel the thrumming. A merchant caught between invoices and fear. They added nothing except their presence and the small courage of listening. Mara felt a familiar ache behind her eyes. If anger made decisions, wars made soup of decades in a night. She had promised herself she'd trade anger for law, even when blade officers whispered that law was only war with silk around it. "Praetor Serev," she said, "you claim mercies you do not practice. You call a collar a kindness." "Our language reflects our culture," Serev replied, crest twitching. "We ensure order. Your own archives show your people once preferred tribute to annihilation." "Order without consent is a tidy cage," May said. "For the record, consent is a door, not a rope." Amicus let a chime drift across the bridge. its timbre like a clean glass struck with a ring. Commander, the beacon is fully authenticated. Any doctrine spoken henceforth attaches by wheel to the Concordate's instruments. Then we proceed, Mara said. The bridge smelled briefly of burnt dust as a cooling fan kicked a swirl past the consoles. She didn't blink. Praetor, under Wheel Clause 9, we request disclosure of levy calculation and collateralization schedules for the last 10,000 transits. Serev's eyes narrowed. That volume is ambitious. It's the public's volume, Mara said. Hearing the ghost of her teacher, an aunt who had taught law under streetlight during blackout years, whisper in the turn of her tongue. She swallowed the memory and steadied herself on the rail. Publish the schedules. We could, Commander, he said, voice silk turned slightly inward. But I propose an efficiency. Pay now, file later. Your convoy is small. We can waive collars for the minors and elderly. We don't buy exceptions for the vulnerable, May said. Because you cannot afford them, Serev replied benignly. We bring witnesses, not warheads. Civilians rode across the witness mesh in small bursts. A grain hauler hand. My grandfather died under a collar on Toll 4. Mercy tastes like salt. A hospice nurse. We are down to last ampules of Respirline. Please let us pass. A dockside vendor, if the Concordate is merciful. Why the knives? Amicus murmured numbers into Mara's ear via bone conduction levy rates that didn't match the Concordate's published tables. Slippage between stated and collected value. A drift like rot under paint. Discrepancy mean 5.7%. The ship mind said, quiet as rain. Variance is systematic. Praetor, Mara said, publish. Serev smiled as if he were the one with time. Commander Ilias, perhaps your ship's mind miscalculates. Concordate instruments are certified. Your recorder is an unaligned mechanism of your own fleet. We decline. Decline logged. May said, hands already moving. Under wheel. A refusal under quorum triggers a corridor of law gambit. We can compel recitation. Try, Serev said pleasantly. Your beacon has to survive the corridor. Your doctrine sounds different when the mix are on. The corridor of law arrived not as a ship, but as alignment 3 arrays extending from the Concordate station like raised eyebrows. 3 from the human flag, like disdainful fingers. Between them, a tight channel of legal light braided with timestamps and authenticated audiences. The corridor hummed audibly, making the hull's bones sing. The air vibrated against teeth. Hold the corridor, Mara said. And the escort Corvette Wadi let go of its place to interpose its flanks between station lance batteries and the beacon's delicate ribs. The impact of a probing burst translated as a thud through the bridge floor. Someone on the lower deck cursed and laughed. Courage was a cheap medicine and a necessary one. Serev's image leaned childish. Your recorder cannot hold if we blink the corridor. Then don't blink, Mara said. Recite. He shrugged with a species grace. Gratitude levy is anchored to the doctrine of uplift tithe. We civilize lanes. We demand a share of profit. We compensate ourselves if profit is delayed. All parties already consented by entering our volumes. Me's eyes flared at the edge. There it is, she whispered, then spoke for the record. Claim of presumptive consent. Receipts are shields when they are seen. Amicus, Mara said, pull the accession charters. The older ones. On the bridge's aft wall, text uncoiled across a slate of light charters signed with shaky human pen names in the first hungry years. Charters endorsed by concordate scribes with very clean fingers. The clauses glinted. Clause 12 flickered in a language dead since caravan days. Amicus cast translations like stepping stones. Clause 12 may read, steady as a metronome. States consent requires an informed quorum present and a public hearing recorded to an open register. Passage through a volume does not constitute consent. Payment under duress does not constitute consent. Silence under threat does not constitute consent. Serev's crest rippled, then smoothed. Old words. Wheel revises. Wheel preserves. Mara said, and we're in a hearing. Recorder is open. You invoked presumptive consent. Under Clause 12, presumptive consent nullifies any levy assessed while asserted. A temporary procedural misstep, Serev said with politeness like a blade polish. We withdraw presumptive consent. Withdrawal recorded, May said. But the assertion existed. Under 12, every levy linked to presumptive consent in the current hour is void ab initio. Not all hands need a weapon. The corridor trembled as the station blinked a near light into the beacon's ribs. The wadi soaked it and shuddered, a plank cracking. On the witness mesh, the nurse wrote, my patients are watching the light move inside your ship. It's beautiful. Please don't die. Wadi reports shield delamination, Okoye said. Captain Dama asks permission to hold. Hold? Mara said. Her throat hurt. Amicus. Begin the return. Commander, the shipmind said with an almost human hesitation. To return costs visibly, we must reflect instruments through their own valuation network. That requires contact with concorded accountability rings. Do it, Mara said, with receipts. A false contract fears sunlight. Aft of the flag bridge, plates opened across the spear's spine. They were old machines, built when humanity's best defense had been perfectly kept books and the unwillingness to be quiet about them. Thin fields stretched outward, plucking at signals like harpists hunting one true note. The arrays caught the Concordat's tariff beams and translated them into entries on a public register that bled across the sky like constellations spelled in ink. Civilians watched with mouths open, feeling the faintest skin prickle as photonic notarization spooled. Dock vendors saw their last 10 receipts blossom and then reattach to the senders with a thin tug. The machinist on the hauler sobbed once when his father's collar debt blinked out on an old wristband and the band vibrated confirmation. A grocer laughed, then covered her face, then laughed again. Payment without consent is theft with stationery. Serev's smile became a wall. This is interference with certified instruments. This is public accounting. May said, look. The corridor's braid thickened. For each levy beam that had extended, a return line now wrote a new entry. Unauthorized assessment rescinded. For each caller token that had pulsed awake, a cancellation rippled back along the exact pathway it had traveled to seize a wrist, a throat, a name. The halo of entries encircled the station like a crown made of paper promises turning to iron. Commander, Okoye said quietly, they're cycling up the lance arrays. Hostile kinetic locks on beacon and wadi. Keep the beacon lit, Mara said. Wadi, fall back by half and present the heavy nose. Let them see your name. Let the record be a sword of paper. The station fired. The lance burned the dark like a glass rod pushed through velvet. It met the wadi's near nose. And every nut, bolt, and prayer on that ship screamed. Plates buckled. Lighting died and returned like a dying breath, choosing otherwise. The captain's voice came thin but whole, holding, spear. The name is seen. Mara leaned on the rail with knuckles white as bone. Cold air washed her wrists. Praetor Serev, she said. It takes a particular confidence to shoot at a recorder during your own hearing. We defend our rights, he said. You advertise your method, May said. We learned to turn tariffs into tides. Amicus pinged Mara privately, its tone the shape of thought sharpened. Commander, a deeper variance surfaces. The Concordat has securitized collars as derivatives traded between bonded houses. Collars are not merely penalties, they are products. Mara felt something old and flat slide through her, the kind of tired you got only when surprise became repetition and still anger found a way to stand. Can we trace? Yes. The pathway to their accountability ring passes through a neutral registry satellite almost within our reach. Okoi, Mara said. Vector a skiff. Give them a courier's flag and a truth they can carry. Lieutenant Saren, prepare a petition for immediate provisional suspension of all collar contracts traded within Wheel for the duration of a public risk inquiry. Okoye's hands moved like fast birds. May's voice rolled clauses into shapes that fit inside each other and refused to fall apart. No flag outranks a quorum. The skiff left the spear like a seed thrown to wind. Its hull was matte and scratched. Its pilot young enough to speak different prayers to the void. It carried a packet of light and law that would land on the neutral registry like a polite knock with a hammer behind it. Praetor, Mara said, your doctrine includes the creation of debt slaves as trade goods. Say it for the record. Uncharitable phrasing, he replied. Crest flat. Collateralization increases liquidity. It brings civilization to hinterlands. By selling people, May said, and did not make it a question. Serev's eyes did not blink. Some species evolve to blink only when permitted by a superior. Mara wondered, not kindly. Who had taught him that? Time is an interest rate with teeth. On the witness mesh, the machinist typed, I was sold twice. Then I am not merchandise. The hospice nurse wrote 1 ampule left. A child's hand drew a crude picture of a ship with a bright circle above it, labeled light. Skiff has linked, Okoye said. Neutral registry acknowledges jurisdiction. They have cracked open the Concordat's collar pools and published the market path. Amicus forwarded a cascade to the beacon. The open register filled with paths like rivers on an ancient map. Houses traded tokens with each other, shaving value and lives. Margin calls hummed through private channels. The court of law sang at a new pitch. And everyone tasted metal. You can silence a person, not a public. Serev's voice held, but a tremor crept into it like frost into seams. Commander Ilias, you have made an enemy of houses with long memories. Mara thought of the first winter in the High Barrens when her aunt had taught law with a charcoal stub on a door ripped from a dead homestead. She thought of the aunt's hands, cracked, steady. She tasted smoke. We remember longer, Mara said. Under Wheel emergency inquiry, I petition to freeze trading in human collateral instruments until the public hearing concludes. Seconded, May said. Mouth a straight line. Recorder acknowledges. Amicus said. Freeze entered. When you name the price, you name yourself. The station shifted posture, not peace, not war, but something like contempt. 2 more lances warmed. Dock guards moved to ring corridors with stun pikes, theatrically visible on public cams. The Concordat knew the value of spectacle. So did the hungry. A civilian voice, rough and low, cut through from the grain hauler. Commander, my name is Dara Juno. My father's wristband is blinking green. I don't know if he's alive to see it, but if he isn't, I am. Thank you. You could hear metal singing in her voice, and behind it a kitchen pan clattering because her hands wouldn't be still. Mara let her head dip once, a bow to someone she would likely never meet. "Praetor," she said, "we will now open the public questions." "A farce," Serev said. His crest flared, cooling slowly. "A carnival of grievance. A ledger of injuries, May corrected softly. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." A faint crackle traversed the corridor like a footstep. The station was rerouting power, and not gently. The air on the bridge carried a baked metal heat that curled the tongue. The Wadi reported another layer gone from its forward plates. Captain Dema's laugh was hoarse now, shredded at the edges. "First question," Mara said, reading the mesh. "From Arj Pal, Doc Vendor, if I am forced to pay to pass, how is that gratitude?" Serev said, "We elevate the lanes. Gratitude is owed for uplift." "Second," May said. From Nurse Yolo, "If a collar is temporary, why do some die still wearing one?" "Misfortune," Serev said. Third. "Okay, Red." Voice jitter steady. "From Child Haza, when do you stop?" "We stop when the ledger is balanced," Serev said. "A public ledger that balances people is a lie." On the bridge's aft wall, the old charters glowed beside modern seals. The two lights made a third you could not name. Mara felt the universe narrow to a single hallway of choices. "Praetor," she said, "you just described an end that never arrives. Under Wheel, a contract without an achievable endpoint is void." "Void in your jurisprudence," Serev said. "Not ours. Wheel is the frame we both signed," May said. "You invoke it. We enforce it." Serev turned his head slightly, listening to a voice Mara could not hear. "Commander Ilias, the houses will not tolerate the freeze. End it now, and we will release your convoy under a single token fee." "You just traded away your doctrine for convenience," Ma said. "Recorded." "Convenience is civilization," as Serev said. "No civilization survives its own excuses." "Amicus," Mara said. "Prepare the system scale return. We move beyond rescission to restitution." The ship mind's presence thrummed. "Commander, to perform a visible restitution, we must route the Concordate's own valuation pulses into a compensatory cascade. That requires line of sight across the station's outer sensor crown. Their crown is charged. Can we angle through the refinery halo? A narrow window exists in 91 seconds. Mara's senses sharpened until the world felt like ice snapped underfoot. She smelled coolant where a line somewhere ran too hot. She heard May's restrained breath. "Okoye, cue the arrays on my mark." "Acknowledged," Okoye said. "Wadi," Mara said. "One last nose. Show them your name again. Always." Captain Dema said, and the laugh this time was softer, the kind of sound you make to a child you will not see again soon enough. "You do not need permission to do what is right." The refinery halo was a lopsided scatter of tanks and tethered barrels, sun-scorched and pitted. Between two, a sliver of clean line opened. Amicus pushed the spear sideways with whisper jets nobody heard, and the arrays sang a tone you could taste like copper and rain. "Mark," Mara said. The arrays took the valuation pulses aimed at collars and levies and wrote them back, scaled by the Concordate's own uplift multipliers, into relief for every recorded victim within span. Credit counters, numbers the Concordate believed were theirs, alone spun backward, then forward, then settled with a public ping at values that made doc accountants faint and get back up because gossip waited for no one. Wristbands, family accounts, small shop registers, hospital cabinets all flickered as value returned, not as charity, But as owed redress, a woman on the hospice deck opened a gray drawer and found it full again. She wept without sound. A boy whose father had stood a shift under a collar in mining dust watched a bracelet blink white and shouted a word only his family used. A private name for luck. On the witness net, emojis bloomed like summer weeds. We turned their toll into a tide that lifts us. Serev's image faltered, then returned with the gloss scrubbed off. Soik, you have stolen. We have accounted, Mara said. Under Wheel 12, and under your own declared multipliers. Return is visible. Public, Commander, Okoye said very softly. Their lances are retargeting the beacon, not a warning shot. Mara looked at the beacon and felt, irrationally, that it looked back. It had a beauty of its own, ribs like bone, petals like a metal flower, light like a vow kept. Wadi, she said, voice steady. If the beacon dies, the record dies. Then the record lives, Captain Dema said. A knot formed in Mara's chest, tight enough to crack ribs. Demas, Commander, Dema said, and the words were the sound of a hand set gently on a shoulder in a corridor after lights out. Let the light hold. A false dawn still warms the hands that hold it. The station fired. The Wadi took it broadside to keep the beam's core away from the beacon. Light went through metal like religion through a family. The Corvette's spine bowed. Alarm screamed. In the moment after, a cheer tore from human throats in 3 decks and 250,000 watchers because the beacon still burned. And because sometimes endurance is not enough, but it is the first indispensable thing. On the witness mesh, Dara Juno wrote, I can hear our ship singing. It's a good song. Serev's crest trembled, no longer entirely under control. Stop. Stop this. Houses will retaliate. You understand nothing of structure. We learned structure from hunger, Mara said. We learned patience from losing. We learned the law where no one wanted to hear it. You don't win by being loved. You win by being seen. Amicus touched Mara's mind again. The contact edged with worry it had learned from them and would deny. Commander, structural retaliation incoming is economic. The Concordat will blacklist the convoy and issue a blanket devaluation on all human instruments in peripheral markets. May lifted her chin. Then we escalate in kind. Policy, not gun. Okoye, Mara said. Broadcast the petition for wheel-wide review of collateralized personhood. Attach the registry's evidence and Serev's admissions. Call for provisional revocation of trade privileges for houses trafficking in collar derivatives until review. Done, Okoye said. Her hands shook. She pinned them under the console and breathed until they stopped. Prater, Mara said, do you wish to add a statement to the petition before circulation? He stared at her for a slow count. We will remember you. We expect it, Mara said. We are not afraid of memory when we have witnesses. The skiff pinged safe return. The neutral registry's seal appeared on the beacon's lower ring, clean and sharp. Every strand of the corridor of law brightened in answer, then stabilized. Commander, Amicus said, market reaction will crater Concordat credit in the near term. That makes them more likely to use force to demonstrate relevance. A plan-changing escalation, May said dryly, for her own notes. Mara blew air slowly through her nose, smelling hot metal and her own sweat, and the bitter, comforting ghost of machine oil. Then we must take a risk they don't expect. We will tender a bond. Okoye blinked. A bond. A pledge measured in hours of our lives. Mara said, we will guarantee the convoy's passage and the provisional compensation pool with time served by our officers under open supervision in public service works. No collars. No sale. Voluntary. Reversible upon conclusion of inquiry. May stared at her, then nodded once, sharp as a gavel. Under wheel. Voluntary service pledged in the light binds the issuer, not their families. It shames any attempt to claim a collar is equivalent. A dangerous precedent, Amicus said, not disapproving. Not approving. Precedents teach, Mara said, and caught herself on the word, tasting her aunt's voice again. But she owned it anyway. A precedent without costs is only a slogan. Serev watched them with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. You will pledge your officers to labor, to service, Mara said. The first assignment will be on hospice decks like Nurse Iolo's, then on salvage beams where your levies broke ships. Visible, accounted. You think shame is currency, Serev said. It spends, May said. Commander, Okoye said quietly. Wadi requests permission to stand down to secondary. Granted, Mara said. And after she closed the channel, she put one hand to her mouth and pressed until the ache was sharp enough to focus her. Amicus, lodge the bond. Use my name first. Done, said the ship mind. The corridor acknowledges. Witness mesh acknowledges. The bond glows. No one trusts a secret promise. The glow of the bond registered as a faint warmth against the skin of every witness wearing a band. A little like the warmth when you held a mug just before it steamed. The hospice nurse lifted a hand and felt it brush her palm with a ghost of heat. She smiled for the first time that day. Maybe the first time in two. Serev, pressed against the corridor's rules, did what cornered powers do. Commander Ilias. By speaking of bonds and services, you admit wheel authority. Therefore, you submit to its risks. I move to demand hostages in lieu of pledge to ensure compliance. May laughed, the sound short and violent. Hostages are medieval. We're not returning to that century. Your law ties you where mine cannot reach. Serev replied, I ask the wheel to name a surety. Amicus's tone cooled. The wheel does not recognize hostages. It recognizes escrow. Then escrow my head, Mara said before the thought could consider its own weight. On record, if I fail to conclude this hearing in fairness under wheel, within span measured and agreed, my rank and commission fall permanently. My access to convoy funds becomes zero. My name becomes a notice on the registry with a red mark. That is what I escrow. May looked at Mara as if seeing a new angle of an old coin. Commander. It's clean, Mara said. It doesn't give him anyone else. A promise with skin in it cuts through noise. Serev inclined his head a fraction. Acceptable. I note your courage. Note our process, Mara said. Amicus threaded the escrow into the corridor. A red sigil appeared, a seal you could taste at the back of the throat like pepper. The witness mesh poured little hearts and angry faces and prayer hands and the occasional obscenity because public means all. Commander, Okoye said, we are receiving an encrypted package on a dead frequency band. Origin unknown. Risk moderate. Misha, Mara said, open a window. A sliver of the pane showed a text with old human letter forms, hand-drawn. A note, there is a clause under your own charter. Subscript 9, used only once during the refugee winters. It allows an inverted hearing, a reversal where the accused runs the questions. If you invoke it, the praetor must answer while you sit in his chair. But it demands a price. Source May asked. Unknown, Amicus said. Style suggests internal dissension within Concordat, or a wheel archivist with too many ghosts. Price Mara asked. Every question asked under inversion must be matched by an answer about your own method, May said. Reading rapidly. It makes hypocrisy visible. if there is any. The light cuts both ways or not at all. Mara flexed her fingers and watched Sarev's steady eyes. Praetor, we propose an inverted hearing. You answer, then we answer. Paired. On method. Public. On register. You would risk exposing your own tricks, he asked. We do not deal in tricks. May said, and if you do, Sarev asked, with a tiny smile that belonged to predators in cool water. Then we learn it here, Mara said. Civilians held their breath collectively. Somewhere in the hospice, a child coughed, and Nurse Iolo checked the ampule drawer again because hope demands habit. Sarev's crest lifted to a precise height agreement. I accept inversion. A contract you can live with is one you can read aloud. First question, Mara said. Who profits most when a caller is traded twice? Sarev, the bonded house that intermediates, claiming facilitation fees. Me our answer to our paired question when we perform a system return. Who benefits first? Mara, those with the smallest balances see relief earliest. We anchor returns to the bottom to prevent extraction from hiding in priority queues. Sarev's eyes flickered. A moral choice disguised as math. Second, Mara said, what percentage of your levies go to lane maintenance versus house dividends? Sarev 42 to maintenance, 58 to dividends and instruments. May, what percentage of our convoy's collected fees go to relief versus fleet upkeep? Mara 60 to relief, 40 to keep our hulls breathing. Third, May said, what is the maximum collar term permitted under your doctrine? Sarev life plus progeny obligations if debt crosses death. May our bonded pledge term, Mara 27 days. In shifts. Reversible. No progeny obligations. No sale. A lie kills faster when it wears a figure. For a heartbeat, even the lances seemed to pause. In the witness mesh, Dara Juno wrote, I can live with that answer. Others typed less gentle things. Sarev's crest lay flat again. A storm sign. Fourth, he said suddenly, taking his turn. How many times have you used force without a hearing? 3. Mara said, without letting her face change. Twice under imminent hazard to life. Once under deception, we later corrected in public with apology. Cost. And rank. She swallowed the old taste of ash. You, force without hearing is within doctrine when debt is in arrears, Saradev said. Counts are private. May smiled like a blade hidden in plain linen. Recorded as non-answer. You can't hide behind a curtain in the glass room. Commander, Amicus murmured, lower than before, risk factor increasing, the Concordate's outer rings discharging. One more strike may collapse the wadi. Mara nodded without moving her eyes. The air on the bridge felt thin. You could smell the ozone from a close strike even through layers of hull. Her left hand tingled, an old injury complaining like an elder when rain approaches. Wadi, she said. Pull to tertiary. Beacon holds alone. Negative, Captain Dema said, with the kind of affection that breaks bone on purpose so it heals straight. We've got one more song. Dema. The channel closed. Not every cost can be avoided, but some can be chosen. Sarev, perhaps sensing the heart's turning, snapped the trap he had left hanging. Under wheel. Any party that cannot protect a recorder forfeits present claims. May's head jerked. They mean to break the beacon to claim we never heard him. Okoye, Mara said. Prepare the mirror arrays to interpose. She stopped. Breath hooking. Because she had used the word she had promised herself to keep until the last necessary moment. The audit arrays. She amended. Interpose them. Scatter their lances by bending their own target solutions. Okoye's mouth tightened, but she nodded. Plates unfolded. Fields sang again. The air thrummed like a plucked wire you could feel in your teeth. A child on the hospice deck squealed and clapped because the light made a halo on his palm. "Praetor," Mara said, speaking over the growing hum, "if you fire on the recorder now, your houses will wear that aim forever. Consider the price." Serev smiled with all his teeth. "We are accountants of price. You can't put a price on what refuses to be sold." The station fired. The audit fields took the first spear and unstitched it, thread by thread, until it fluttered harmlessly into the corridor walls. The second spear grazed the beacon's ribs and left a scorch like a handprint. A hairline fracture appeared across one petal and crawled a centimeter. The beacon held. The wadi did not. Its spine, already bowed, reached the limit of what courage and steel could do together. The ship broke where it had been strongest an hour ago, near its core. It did not explode. It came apart with dignity, with a sigh, like a temple letting out its last congregation by candlelight. The name on its prow drifted into the corridor's light and hung there. Letters incandescent, then dim. There was silence on the human bridge that tasted of copper and lasted one breath too long. On the witness mesh, 1,000 hands wrote the ship's name at once. A name spoken by many does not die. Mara did not close her eyes because there were duties that required eyes open. She put both hands on the rail until the ache traveled up her arms and made her stand upright. Beacon status. Functional, Okoye said, voice unsteady, then finding its spine. Recorder is intact. Record, me said. Throat thick. Cost acknowledged. Without it, the hearing would have died. Amicus's tone wrapped the moment with a steadiness none of them felt. Skiff confirms the registry has stamped the wadi's sacrifice into the public roll of inquiry costs. Praetor, Mara said, voice level through force of will, you have shown your method. We have shown ours. The next step is adjudication. He bared his teeth again. You think this is done. We think this is seen. May said, receipts aren't enough. Someone has to read them. A new light pulsed at the corridor's far end. A cool, amber beacon carrying the wheel's signature. The Star Court was waking. The sensation on the bridge was impossible to mistake. The air took on the hush of an empty theater, a breath before the curtain rises. Even the station seemed to still predatory as a cat struck by sudden music. Star Court acknowledges standing public inquiry. Amicus said, voice lower than low. A magistrate is inbound on untouchable authority. Praetor Serev, Mara said, you asked for structure. Here it comes. Structure bends, he said softly. It does, she agreed. Toward something. You can bend a bar, but you can also straighten one. The magistrate arrived not as a ship, but as a change in light that made pupils narrow and hearts. 2. Every beam in the corridor acquired edges. Every shadow earned a job title. A figure stepped into the shared holopane, robed not in myth thread, but in fabric without story, which is a story of its own. Public inquiry recognized, the magistrate said. Their voice carried a texture like river stones. Escrows noted, bonds acknowledged, collateralized personhood petitions consolidated. Parties proceed. Serev inclined his head. Mara did the same, and felt her aunt's hand on her shoulder again, the way it had been after the first hearing she had won in a warehouse under smuggled lights. The memory smelled of damp wood and pepper soup and victory that felt like breath, not triumph. Magistrate, Mix said, before adjudication, one motion strike the doctrine of presumptive consent as contrary to wheel where public hearings are required and add a provisional revocation of trade privileges for houses dealing in human life as instrument. Motion heard. The magistrate said, opposition. Serev opened his mouth, then closed it as his crest twitched. He sensed the tilt and looked for purchase, but the floor under him had been turned to a register. A clock is only as honest as its hands, Commander Ilias, the magistrate said. Your bond stands as a lamp. Know that if adjudication finds your method wanting, the lamp will go out in your hand. I said it knowing that, Mara said. Praetor Serev. They continued. Your doctrine has been recited under quorum. Know that if adjudication finds your method contrary to wheel, the houses who profited will bear costs on the public roll until balances are returned. We will contest the tallies, Serev said. You will be welcome to try, the magistrate said. And for a moment, something like humor passed over their mouth and was gone. You don't have to like the scale to stand on it. The Star Court opened its inner pane and began to count, not bodies, not ships, but harms and returns. The audit fields fed it entries. The registry contributed the paths of instruments. The witness mesh added statements that were suddenly weighty. Each voice became a bead on a string, and the string made a pattern you could wear without choking. Commander, Amicus whispered across the bones of Mara's ear. One more plan-changing escalation remains. The Concordat can trigger a pan-station quarantine protocol, claiming plague, and freeze our convoy under health doctrine. They'll use Mercy's face to wear iron. How long to invoke, she asked. 90 seconds. If they have prepared the script, the shipmind said. Of course they have, May said softly. They brought knives to a clinic. A Mercy misused is a knife in a white coat. Mara's tongue tasted of lime and old fear. She thought of the hospice decks, the single ampule left, the smell of antiseptic and hope. Praetor, she said. Are you about to declare a health emergency? Serev did not blink. Under the authority you so respect, yes, for the safety of all. The magistrate's head turned slightly. Evidence. Rumor of fever on a freighter, Serev said smoothly. Rumor is not evidence, the magistrate said. Enough to trigger a caution, Serev replied, and tapped something unseen. Okoye's board filled with red. They've issued the quarantine prescript, she said, voice dropping into that place where fear and competence live together. May, Mara said. Health doctrine cross-reference. What breaks the prescript? May was already there, hands fast. Open clinical testimony from a licensed practitioner on scene overrides rumor-based prescripts under wheel. If the practitioner attests to conditions and the recorder holds, prescript fails. Nurse Yolo, Mara said. Do you have license? Yes, came the answer, roughened by exhaustion and the act of not crying for hours. State certified. I am on deck. Patients visible. No fever beyond normal variation. 1 ampule left until the drawer filled. No quarantine justified. Recorder holds. The magistrate said, voice crisp as a cut apple. Prescript fails. Praetor Serev. This attempt adds weight against your method. You can't hide a chain under a white glove forever. Serev's crest trembled. Houses behind him leaned hard on his spine, trying to pilot a body from far away. He swallowed. We asked a question, the court answered. We adapt. You bend. May murmured. We both do. Serev said. A sliver of fellow, feeling visible before office, reacquired the man. Magistrate, Mara said. We request a recess to consolidate returns and prevent system collapse. The refinery halo is not built to tolerate this much justice in 1 hour. Granted, the magistrate said. 7 minutes. Under watch. The corridor's light softened as if someone opened a window in a room stale with argument. Crew on the bridge stretched fingers. shook out wrists, blew breath between lips, and tasted it cold, then warm. The witness mesh filled with mundane things a recipe traded, a prayer half sent, a joke about accountants and saints sharing a bar stool, an offer of spare screws. Life came back in little bits. It always does. Mara stepped back from the rail and looked at the wadi's drifting name. She let herself blink once. Slow. Amicus, she said. Mark the wadi's captain for the first assignment under our pledge. We'll carry her coat to hospice and hang it on a nail where it makes the most noise. Marked, the shipmind said. May. Mara said, prepare the final shape for the precedent lock. If the court rules, we want a line they can carve into the wheel, no more presumptive consent, no instruments on people. Any attempt to call a caller by another name, void. I'll draft it in a way that makes future courts lazy, May said. Lazy courts are safest when the right words sit in their chair. A good law makes good judges look brilliant and bad ones look busy. On the station, Serev stood with his hands behind his back and watched his own people move under the weight of what he had said and of what had been seen. He wasn't a monster. He was a man who had learned a shape and fit it without question, and then found the shape did not fit the light. Mara felt a briefly unhelpful compassion for him, which she filed and ignored. The magistrate lifted their head. Recess ends. Parties return. Serev's crest lowered in acknowledgement. Mara returned to the rail. Okoye's hands hovered, ready to catch falling plates. May's mouth held a line that meant she had forged a sentence she liked enough to get tattooed on the wall of someone's heart. Proceed, the magistrate said. Mara drew breath. The beacon glowed. The witness mesh buzzed like summer insects. And somewhere, in a hospital drawer that had been empty, the ampules lay in neat rows under a clear lid, brighter than jewels. The courtroom is just a room until we fill it with us. The magistrate's gaze slid across both panes like a slow blade through cloth. The corridor light held steady, and the air hummed with disciplined tension that brushed the skin like static. Mara flexed her fingers once on the rail and let the ache in the knuckles keep time with her breath. She could smell the faint pepper of hot circuits under the consoles, and beneath that, a cleaner note of filtered citrus that never quite masked steel. Truth tastes like metal before it clears the tongue. Parties, and the magistrate said. We resume with the petition to revoke presumptive consent doctrine and to suspend trade in human instruments pending final rule. Their voice made even the station's predatory geometry seem less certain. You will offer closing statements for this phase before we set questions. Serev inclined his head and spoke first, choosing poise like armor. Wheel thrives on lanes disciplined by predictable tolls. Gratitude is a civilizing habit. We do not enslave, we regulate. When contracts extend past a life, it is because debts outlive bodies, and houses provide continuity. His crest lifted exactly 3 degrees. The codified measure of sincerity. Mara kept her face quiet and answered without heat. The corridor heard your language and saw your hands. We rescinded the charges assessed under a doctrine you admitted, then returned value using your own math so the poor is filled before any ledger fattened. We proposed service in the light instead of collars disguised as kindness. If civilization needs collars, it needs different architects. Say it bare so everyone hears where you stand. Civilians wrote small truths into the mesh. Dara Juno. My father's band is green. He can close his eyes. A dock inspector, if lanes need money. Take it like clean rent, not breath. Nurse Iolo. My patients are quieter now. The drawer is full. Each word entered the shared room and stayed because the recorder kept its promise. The magistrate's eyes rested on Sarev. Praetor, you asked for structure. You received structure. You fired on an instrument keeping the words honest. Explain that in terms your doctrine recognizes. Sarev did not flinch. Demonstrative necessity. Power ignored is taxable disorder. If their recorder had broken, the hearing would have reformed under our terms in a more controlled venue. Your venue excludes the public. May said, careful as she set a needle. That is the point. A promise without witnesses is a trick with a nice font. Commander Ilias, the magistrate said, you tendered a bond of service. Specify assignments and verify reversibility. Mara answered as she had planned. We will begin on hospice decks, shift by shift, visible, recorded. Then on salvage lines to pull broken hulls from lanes your levees cluttered. Volunteers can withdraw at any time without penalty. No commerce in bodies, only hours freely given, measured and capped. Public acceptance noted, the magistrate said as the witness mesh pinged open hands. Escrow remains. Magistrate, Sarev said smoothly, they speak as saints until a storm comes. When houses signal the lanes to close, their relief evaporates. They cannot float commerce on sentiment. Not sentiment, May said. Audit. Publication. A rule you signed. We do not ask for faith, we bring a receipt. The magistrate lifted one hand, and even the corridor's hum seemed to listen. We now set formal questions. Their gaze cut to Soraya first. Praetor Sarev, in your last 1,000 assessments, how many included explicit, contemporaneous public hearings? Sarev paused long enough that silence became content. 24. Not even 3%, May murmured. Commander Ilias, the magistrate said, in your last 20 convoy disputes, how many required force before a hearing? 3. Mara said, we named them already. 2 to keep people breathing. 1 in error we corrected. The magistrate let that hang until the weight concluded its work. Praetor Sarev, confirm or deny that houses have traded collar tokens as derivatives and bundled them into instruments presented as neutral wealth? Confirm, Sarev said, because denial now would be theater with bad lighting. Commander Ilias, confirm or deny that your fleet has securitized relief pools tied to projected returns from houses judged in violation. Confirm, Somara said. We securitized the return, not the people. Instruments backed by fines owed, not bodies. You can bind a promise to money without binding a person. Okoye leaned closer, voice pitched low. Commander, outer ring shows unusual traffic. I'm seeing private shuttles launch from the station's shadow ports on dead transponders. Targets Mara asked, keeping her jaw easy. Witness bands, Okoye said. They're likely going after public recorders in dockside quarters. If they erase local mirrors, they can claim the corridor was a trick. Mara kept her eyes on the pane. Amicus. Deputize the skiff network. Push redundant copies of the hearing to every unaligned buoy and family relay. Friend or listener, not friend or foe. Deploying, said the ship mind. We will make pirates into archivists by necessity. If they try to shred the page, make more pages. The magistrate's questions resumed with the steadiness of rain. Praetor Sarev, define mercy in your doctrine without using the words dit or discipline. Sarev's crest stuttered once. Time extended without immediate penalties. Commander Ilias, define mercy in yours without using the words light or public. Mara let the answer sit in her mouth until it was simple. Space to breathe and change before harm hardens into shape. Recorded, the magistrate said, Praetor, A technical when a bonded house purchases a collar from another. Under what condition does the person attached learn of the transfer? When the obligation is recalculated, which can be years. Yes, the longer you hide a chain, the heavier it becomes when found. A warning tone slid along the spear's inner ribs like a finger on the lip of a glass. Okoye didn't raise her voice. Dead frequency injection attempt on the beacon. Commander, payload isn't a weapon, it's a doubt. Assigned argument claiming the recorder is biased. Source May asked. Fronted through 3 neutral shells. Real origin smells like house stale. Mara let herself smile without mirth. Amicus. Permit the packet and wrap it in commentary. Let every phrase link to the raw rule it abuses. No flame. Only footnotes. Annotating. Amicus said. Tone crisp with tiny pleasure. The public will see a paper snake in a jar with a neat label. Show the trick, not just the hand. The magistrate waited, either sensing the parry or unmoved by it, then inclined their head. We move toward findings. Before we do, each party may call one witness for a single unbroken statement, limited to 1 minute. May's eyes met Mara's. Dara, Mara said softly. Okoye opened the channel. Dara Juno's face appeared, smudged and lit by the bad glow of working lights. She squared her shoulders in the small way strong people do when no one should have to see it. My grandfather wore a collar until it erased his name from the inside. Today, a band blinked, and it was like hearing a door I thought was welded shut creak open. If you say commerce needs that collar to keep moving, then stop the carts until you find a way that doesn't eat us. Mara kept her hands still on the rail. Serev's crest lowered to show he would call no one. Our books speak. Then they will be read, the magistrate said. A scale does not apologize for the weight it shows. The Start Court's light deepened one shade toward amber. The corridor's hum eased a fraction, as if tension had learned a better shape. The magistrate's words struck with the finality of lines etched into a metal plate. On the petition to revoke presumptive consent in all volumes where Wheel governs. Granted. On the petition to suspend trade in human instruments pending rule. Granted and extended to final prohibition if rule is affirmed. On reparative returns. Provisional schedule adopted as demonstrated by the convoy's system return, subject to audit improvements. Serev's eyes closed for a single beat, and if he had been alone, he might have put fingers to his brow. Magistrate, we will appeal. Appeal is a right, the magistrate said. Not a time out. Compliance begins now. No one is immune to a rule they signed in daylight. The corridor's side panes flowered with instructions. Houses would pay into a pool that had been theoretical an hour earlier and now had contours like a basin carved in rock. The magistrate turned to Mara. Commander Ilias, the court notes your bond and sets its first assignments under Wheel's supervision. The convoy will place 2 officers on hospice decks for public service shifts beginning with the next cycle. Documented, voluntary, reversible. Your escrow remains visible until final rule. Understood, Mara said. She tasted sap and steel in her mouth, a memory of shipside tea and a tool bitten against anger. Okoye's board chimed again. Wrong and urgent. Commander, the station's shadow ports vented 3 more shuttles. Their transponders are dark, and their holds are full of crates shaped like grain, but reading like recorder housings. They're stealing local backups, May said. Not if listening is cheaper than theft. Mira replied. Amicus. Flood those shuttles with an open stream of the hearing. They can't store it all, so they'll forward it to dump weight. The public will catch the spilled words like rain. As you like, Amicus said, satisfied. We will turn smuggling into distribution. Turn their exit into an entrance you control. Serev watched, calculation giving way to something like reluctant respect. Commander Ilias, I concede a point. You fight like a scribe who learned to shoot and then put the weapon down again. I learned to count where guns were scarce, Mara said, and to speak where silence was easy. The magistrate raised their hand, and the corridor stilled toward ceremony. We now frame the precedent. Jurist Lieutenant Saren, provide your proposed language. Me did not look down to read, where wheel governs. Consent cannot be presumed. Public hearings must precede any levy affecting liberty or survival. Instruments that treat human lives as transferable property are void and forbidden. Service pledged in light is distinct from bondage and can pass to kin or sale. Any attempt to rename a collar without altering its nature is null. The magistrate's mouth made that half-humor again. You write for lazy future benches. I teach for tired ones. May said, don't make good people work harder than bad rules. Praetor Serev, the magistrate continued. You may submit an alternative phrasing for the record. Serev's crest flickered, then steadied. The Concordat proposes gratitude levies permissible only with explicit recorded assent under quorum. Any encumbrance upon a life that outlasts that life is forbidden. May tipped her head in a small, begrudging nod. We can live with that. Combined language drafted, the magistrate said, entered to the public register as proposed precedent 91 beta pending full rule. A hum radiated down the corridor like warmth entering a cold house. The witness mesh bloomed with the simple relief of understanding words that would matter tomorrow, somewhere in the hospice decks. Nurse Yolo opened a window slit and let in fresh air that smelled of dust and the faint, medicinal sweetness of new ampules. The best law is the one people can explain to each other. Now enforcement, the magistrate said. Praetor Serev, your houses will assign liaison officers to dismantle collar markets and release encumbered persons within span measured by days, not seasons. Failure converts obligations to fines triple-weighted in the pool. Triple, Serev repeated softly, tasting it as if it were a spice too sharp. You aim to end a market older than your convoy. We aim to stop selling neighbors, Mara said. A low tremor shivered through the spear's deck. Okoye's hands flew. Thermal spike on array 3. A baffle must have cracked during the last interposition. Vent and patch, Mara said. The air filled with a smell like warm coins and clove. Assigned salvage crew Bravo to stand by in case of panel shears. Amicus's voice acquired a grain of worry it tried to hide. Commander, the skiff pilot reports a burn along the forearm from a hot coupler. Nothing grave, but the skin will carry a story. Add that to our cost list, May said. We pay in more than numbers. You can't pretend the bill was light when your hand still shakes. Serev's image shifted. He was hearing more voices behind him again. When he spoke, the edges of office smoothed the man away. Houses will comply under protest. We note damages to station property. He glanced toward the drifting letters of the Wadi's name and, to his credit, did not make the mistake of sneering. And to yours. We'll write them, Mara said. The magistrate cut through the exchange. One last motion convert the convoy system return from demonstration to binding schedule. Amicus, confirm your capability to oversee continuing returns without external seizure. I confirm, the shipmind said. We will publish timetables and anchor relief to smallest balances first. We will audit ourselves aloud. A machine that loves a rule is a good companion for humans who break them when they must. The corridor's ambient light eased toward ordinary day as the Star Court drew its first rectangle around chaos. Before the magistrate dismissed them, they let one more question hang. Praetor Serev, do you stand by the word gratitude for a levy that never asked? Serev considered, and in that moment, his crest was just a living thing atop a living person. No, he said, not anymore. Recorded, the magistrate said. Names change when they touch a real room. The court recessed for formal drafting. The hearing did not end. It transformed into labor. On hospice decks, 2 human officers in black uniforms with their red cuffs rolled up scrubbed tables and filled vials and stood still when new arrivals needed steadier hands to hold their shaking. One of them, May, counted dosages with lips moving in half prayers made of numbers. The other, Okoye, learned the rhythm of quiet breathing and loud coughing without flinching. Dara Juno's voice appeared on the mesh again, shy where earlier it had been iron. My father's band doesn't itch anymore. We're bringing stew to the corridor guards because tired people listen better when fed. In the background, a spoon clinked against a pot, and the sound was as holy as any bell. On the spear, salvage teams clipped themselves to rails and pushed off into the refinery halo where broken panels spun like the last leaves of a sick season. Their gloves smelled of oil and oranges. They sang under their breath, in the way crews do when the work should be quiet. But the heart needs a noise. Hands clean faster when the words are clean first. A new escalation slithered close. Not loud, but consequential. Amicus found it in the shape of an accounting subroutine masked as station maintenance. Commander, the ship mind said, a house-run algorithm is attempting to rechristen callers as retention bands and resume trade under renamed fields. Me swore softly. Here it comes, the trick of paint. Magistrate, Mara called. We have an attempted rename. The Star Court returned like a light leaning in. Show. Amicus projected a neat table that tried to pretend it didn't carry throats. The magistrate didn't raise their voice. Under proposed 91 beta, renaming without altering nature is null. Attempt recorded and sanctioned. Houses. You are now on notice that every renaming attempt converts to fixed fines. You can't dodge a door by painting it a wall. Serev's crest twitched, then flattened. Our people grew up under different lamps, he said. They mistake habit for rule, then teach them rule, May said, and bring better lamps. Serev surprised them by nodding once. I will, he said, and some of the stiffness in his voice belonged to truth learning a new bend. Outside the bridge, the field plates finished venting, and the smell of hot coins faded to something like rain on old metal. Okoye exhaled. Array 3 is stable. We'll need a day to replace the baffle and a prayer to keep it quiet. Say the prayer and order the part, Mara said. Both feel better. The magistrate's pain widened, softening into near-ordinary light. We approach final. Speak the precedent lock. Me did not consult any screen. Precedent 91 beta consent cannot be presumed. Any instrument converting human life to transferable property is forbidden and void. Service pledged in the light is voluntary and non-transmissible. Any rebranding of bondage fails on sight. Gratitude levies require explicit recorded assent under quorum and prior publication of schedules. Violations convert to reparations with multipliers anchored to the poorest first. The magistrate looked to Serev. Concordat. Serev stood very straight. We accept the form with one addition. Houses must publish maintenance accounts quarterly to an unedited registry. May's expression flickered with something like respect strangling 1,000 arguments. Agreed, she said. Put the rule where lazy thieves will stumble over it. Entered. the magistrate said. Applied now. Enforceable now. The public will see it on the register within moments. Magistrate, Mara said, voice even. On escrow. The magistrate's gaze settled. Escrow satisfied by compliance. Your lamp remains lit. Mara didn't let relief change her bones. She nodded once at the drifting letters of the wadi, and then at the hospice channel where Okoye was laughing quietly at a joke a child had told about a spaceship with a silly name. We'll keep the shifts, Mara said. Lit or not. Noted. The magistrate said. The court retires. The corridor will persist for appeals and audits. A room that worked once wants to work again. The light changed back toward ordinary, which now wore a difference that wouldn't wash off. Civilians kept typing small things because large ones were complete a recipe for stew with limited spices, a note about a cousin who could weld, an offer to carry a crate, a song half remembered. The hearing had turned them into neighbors. Okoye slumped on her stool and grinned at Mara with eyes that could finally afford it. You just outlawed a market and offered to mop floors. May wrote the words. Mara said, I held a bucket. May scrubbed sanitizer from her wrists and shook out her fingers. We all carried the weight. Even Serev. Even Amicus. I only count, the shipmind said, pretending to be gruff. And remember, you also nag, Okoye said affectionately. A soft engine makes a hard ship kind. Serev's image remained in the pane. He had not fled. He looked strangely smaller without a doctrine to wear, but his eyes had learned something hard in the last hour. Commander Ilias, he said, your aunt must have been relentless. Mara blinked at the curve of the memory as it turned from private to shared. She taught in the dark with a charcoal stub on a stolen door. She said, she believed light makes thieves clumsy. She was right, Serev said. He drew a breath and, with a grimace that probably cost him friends with expensive cups, added, if you'll accept it, the station will contribute med supplies to the hospice deck you serve first. May didn't smile. She let the sentence take shape without sarcasm. We accept under public receipt. Of course, Serev said, his crest dipping in measured concession. Take the olive branch and write the bill on it. The spear's internal clock ticked toward quieter hours, and fatigue arrived in the joints and behind the eyes like a back-owed debt making good. Salvage crews stowed lines. The refinery halo steadied its lopsided spin. The wadi's letters drifted closer to the beacon until they touched the rim like a hand finding a shoulder in sleep. Amicus lowered its voice. Commander. The skiff pilot who burned their arm asked not to be named on the roll. I don't want to be a story, they said. Just send the new couplers faster next time. Send them with a thank you note that doesn't sound like poetry, Mara said. And a spare glove. May's console pinged with the Star Court's final seal. The pane showed a neat rectangle with words that even an angry dock vendor could recite after one beer. The witness mesh exploded with little bursts of relief and a few dissenters who preferred simpler tyrannies because they require less thinking. The public held all of it without shaking apart. The light doesn't make everyone good, it makes them visible. A quiet settled that was not emptiness, but the room after work is done. Okoye rolled her shoulders and glanced at the hospice feed, where two officers were learning how to roll sheets without wrinkling them. May went to schedule the next shifts with the kind of thoroughness that makes institutions outlast champions. Serev stayed one heartbeat longer. You understand we will appeal, he said. Out of duty, more than hope. You would be derelict if you didn't, Mara said. Bring better arguments and better budgets. We'll bring the same lamps. He nodded once, and when he left the pane, it was not flight, but dismissal. The first wise retreat he had made all day. Amicus dimmed non-essential panels to let tired eyes rest. The recyclers breathed out the late-shift smell of ozone and clean cloth. The taste of copper lifted from tongues. Outside, the station's ring reflected ordinary star blue again. Ordinary now meant something else. The quiet after a decision is when you decide again. On the beacon's rim, a small service bot settled and began to polish the scorch in slow circles. The gesture was absurd and exactly right. It spread a smell like warmed polish and banana peel into the thin space, so a mechanic on the outer walkway could joke. Even the bot knows this was a good day. Commander, Mies said softly, "You know what comes with the new rule. We'll be asked to show our archives when someone claims we cut corners. We'll find our own old sins where we made haste and called it mercy. Then we'll write them," Mara said, "with names and costs." Okoye tilted her head toward the hospice feed, where a child with a thin face and wide eyes waved at the camera as if waving at a ship could keep it from leaving. "We can hold a shift there even if the escrows are settled." "That's the point," Mara said. "A clock with hands you trust is worth winding." The Star Court's final packets arrived like neat envelopes sliding under a door. Precedent 91 Beta gleamed on the public register. A second entry, more modest, recorded the convoy's pledge schedule and the first 2 completed hours, stamped with open signatures. A third tagged House Stale with a fine for attempted rename. The register didn't gloat. It simply held. Civilians began to log off in batches, work shifts and family meals claiming them back. Before Dara Juno closed her pane, she typed, "I put stew outside the hearing room. Take some. Justice runs better when no one is faint." May's mouth softened. "Gods bless practical people." "Or rules that feed them," Okoye said. Mara stepped down from the rail. Her legs felt carved from ship metal and the last stubborn roots of a mountain winter. The ache across her shoulders suggested sleep and warned against it. She paused by the aft pane where charters old and new shared a wall like family portraits across centuries of taste and shame. She touched the frame with 2 fingers and felt the cool, faintly textured surface under skin that had held too many styluses and not enough hands lately. Her reflection in the pane looked thinner and more honest than she felt. Her aunt's voice rose from a corridor years old. "Don't be noble. Be useful. Be useful in front of people so they can copy you." The witness mesh, mostly fading now, carried one last note from Nurse Iolo. "The room smells like antiseptic and broth." She wrote, "We have quiet. We have work. Send the next 2 for the midnight shift." "Copy," Okoye replied, "because sometimes the best legal language is ordinary." Amicus cut the corridor feed to maintenance levels and filed copies to every place a bored adolescent might stumble and become a citizen by accident. It dimmed internal lights 1 notch and left the beacon bright because some symbols work best when they make sleep difficult. Mara finally let herself sit. The chair's cushion compressed into an honesty that didn't pretend comfort. She unsnapped her cuffs, rolled them twice, and looked at the Wadi's drifting name. A muscle under one eye clicked like a misfiring relay, and then calmed. She spoke, mostly to herself and partly to the room that had listened all day. "We didn't make a new world. We made 1 door heavier and marked it in paint no one can scrub off. That's enough for 1 shift. On the public pane, right at eye level where the tired could see it, a rectangle cooled toward ordinary gray and then blinked once with a small, tidy light. Public ledger entry blinking confirmed. We stood in the wake of a decision and felt the old anger's lesson like tide leaving a shore. And we chose a different habit. We will still argue and break things and want revenge when we are tired. And we will fail again under banners that sound like mercy but hide prices we couldn't see. But we left a line where anyone can point and say here, this is where we stopped pretending a chain was a favor. This is where we put numbers to shame instead of people. Tomorrow we carry buckets and rules in equal hands. And if we're patient, our children will think this was obvious. The light remains on because we agreed to stand in it.